Are you looking for American-made guard equipment at affordable prices? Guard Gear UK is your one-stop shop for all your Winterguard and color guard requirements. We supply a wide range of rifles, sabers, gloves, and equipment, all made by our partners in the USA. Not only that, but we also offer free shipping. That's right, free shipping to all mainland UK addresses. Why not upgrade your group today with some premium US-made guard equipment from Guard Gear UK? Find out more at www.guardgear.co.uk. Guard Gear UK is proud to be supporting the WGUK 2021 season.
As the session evolves, but we're delighted to have William join us this evening or this afternoon, where he is, to go into detail and present to us the design analysis caption. So for those who joined us or have seen the previous session with Adam, with general effect and that focus session, this session is a real good focus session with William in regards to the design analysis caption. I'm over the moon to have William with us this evening. I've worked with William at Mayflower from a design perspective. Actually, William was the first person as my judge's mentor when I first started my journey. And now he's
got a lot to answer for, Barry, then.
Got a lot to answer for. All good, of course. And of course, I've worked with William along with some of my other sort of colleagues of Pete and Richard and so forth with the CGM panel. So William's experience is massive. So this is great to have William spend some time with us here and with his expertise as a WGI judge. So yeah, without no further ado, William, then over to you.
Thanks, Barry. Excited to be here. Looking forward to running through a bunch of slides and looking at some videos and hearing from you all and what your questions and challenges may be. This will be somewhat of a balanced view, but it may lean a little bit into design focus and how you might plan and put your shows together related to design analysis, but there'll be some ways to balance it to judges and what judges should look for. So feel free to put those questions in the chat and we can interrupt. Sharon's going to watch for those. There'll be a couple moments when I might ask you to type in the chat some things. We're going to look at some pictures and then it should be a good time. So I'm going to share some slides with you. And we can get started. The first thing, we'll just kind of run through a little bit of design.
Like a start of a movie.
Have to get you in the zone, you know.
Yeah, I like it.
And like I said, we're going to talk today about specifically this caption, which is really the connecting caption between the skills you teach performers and then the plan you have in your show and how those things relate. And if it may be interesting to, if you think of things along the way that are how the two captions, general effect and design analysis, are the same or different, then maybe highlight those and we'll talk about some of that. And just everyone needs to understand general effect covers all the other captions. So all of the captions are inside general effect.
I've got an office chair in the car that came from Nan and Granddad's. I didn't know if you would like.
So I have a few things I want to make sure and emphasize with you today. And let me get that short. Yeah.
I think you might be
Unity, we're going to spend a lot of time on and really focusing. I want you to be thinking about how you've put your shows together.
I'm not sure if it'll fit.
Someone can find her and mute that,
We'll
I'm
mute
sure.
ourselves.
Yes, Dylan. Is that your mother I can hear?
Good.
Sorry, William.
No problem.
I think
So
I've
we'll
muted
spend-
everybody now apart from William, so I think you should be free to go now.
Okay. We'll spend a lot of time on unity. It's something I wanted you to emphasize as you put your shows together, and then also judges should be speaking more to it. I think sometimes design analysis gets a little caught up in all the pieces and parts, and it doesn't really talk about the whole and the impact of the whole. So that'll be an area for us to talk about. Compositional elements, the details in the caption, we'll be spending some time looking at. And then how I want judges to think about putting value on a show, and then how you can plan your show in that sense. So we'll start, this will be the first time for you all to do some work in your chat. If you would, we're gonna look at a few pictures, and I'd like you to think about it and put in your chats what elements of unity are in this picture. What's making this a unified look on a composition? Vertical lines, yeah. Left to right. Repeating colors, yep, balance of color. So balance certainly is in there. You get a sense of oneness and completeness in this picture that really lets you see there was a plan and it works as a totality. Next one. And I think you might be starting to see some design terms come out in what you see as unifying ideas. Could be similar to what we saw before. Anyone else want to chat in there? What strikes me on this one is different aspects. Barry talked about textures. I think that's an excellent difference from that first one, even though the trees would have been a texture in the first element. The shapes unify this, whether they're filled in, that's right. Thanks, Richard. And you still get a balance and a flow, even though there's different lightness in this picture. So a lot of ways help us. Repetitiveness, connectivity. And if I'm looking away, I'm watching the chat on a different computer. Great. Here's one that's a little bit different than those. Yes, connected people. You know, that's something that we need to remember in our activity of people and faces, and seeing people is something unique in what we do. So sometimes we get a little abstract and maybe too logical when we think of design analysis. The palette and the mood, physical unity. I think the lines that come down through the dresses into the different space. So there's those cracks help unify the way that they're looking. There's a flow and emotion that goes up. So you get a sense of balance again in this one and a completeness to this picture. And then one there about weight, that's right. What are obvious things in this one that are about unity? Tessellation, yep. The repetition of the same shape, different colors. The blackbirds in there help balance this whole stage again. So it's just kind of interesting. This one is just something a little bit different I wanted you to see. And then in the last one was uniformity came in there at the end of that chat. Does this one have pattern, color, gives you a clear emphasis point? It's kind of a surprise. So what we talked about in all of those is this idea of oneness, and there's a clear intention. So if there's an item I want you to take away as you design your shows, and then as judges work on commenting on the shows, is looking for this area of intention. We don't have to know what your intention was necessarily, but we have to tell that you had one. And so I think we can see it through unity. Do the parts work together? Do they relate to each other? Here are a couple other things that you can consider as you build your shows. And we saw that in some of the picture examples. And when we look at some videos, I'm going to ask you about this idea of simplicity and nothing extra, because oftentimes the question becomes, we see something extra and it distracts us from the show, or have you edited to the point of where it's really pure? And here was just another example of really simple approach to same technique. You still get a clear message from this, but it shows you that simplicity, it develops unity and makes it really strong and clear. We saw it in the bird example, several of the examples in the pictures about repetition. We would want to see you use repetition and motif in your shows to build familiarity. And a friend of mine, Judge, talks about it as the grandmother rule of, if you brought your grandmother to and watched the show, could she get it? If it's too intellectual, if it's not well constructed, then she wouldn't understand it. And so I think it is back to you having that clear intention. Here's an example of that repetition and unity. This one applies significantly in our activity as well. Where you place things automatically makes them related to each other. And in that last picture, you can create emphasis or you can create balance on what you see. Here's an example that's pretty simple, but it's got repetition of the L shapes, but also then proximity of certain L's, and yet the whole stage is balanced. And when you look at it, you get a sense of that oneness and completeness in considering the totality of what you're looking at. So this is just a reminder of those elements. And then this is some things for you to consider. I like judges to comment and point out to designers that everything we see is consciously designed, or it's been left there and you haven't gotten to it yet. So even in your head, you may have a plan in place, but we have to judge what we see on that day. And then an element I like to hear is, have you filtered your choices and your plans through time with your clear intention? Or will judges should be calling you out on questions whenever we have an item that we don't think really fits? If I start to see a rule that's, let's say your show is about being Little Red Riding Hood in a forest and there's a river, but then you do your feature in the river, or you're standing across it and you never have a bridge, you know, those are little things that could make a difference about setting your space that relates to both GE, but in design, I think we have to look at it and say, are you living by your choices? Here's some other examples of unity that you can consider in terms of through time. We talked about repetition, proximity, and simplicity, alignment, contrast. And then just to give us a little break before we watch some videos, you know, here's a Pride of Cincinnati from a couple years ago. And you can see line in the floor, line in the costumes. They had star spinners. They're in the shape of a star. You know, everything about this, it isn't the concept was stars, but the design of unity and the plan is the comments that we want to hear from in design analysis. And don't be afraid to talk about that there's a star on the costume. It's not about the effect of the costume, but it's about the completeness of the design and the choice that they made through time. All right, I'm gonna put a video up here for us now, and want to have you again potentially type in your chat whenever we watch the next video. Otherwise, I'll talk through it a little bit. This is one that I want you to look at in terms of the choice that this team made in the concept of the show in terms of time. And they're looking at their arms. They have a clock dial and the shape. And then you can see, and you look at this and say, what do they have to do to maintain consistency over the course of their show to keep you in this spell and keep you connected? So here's an example, and then I'll let you watch it, and then we'll talk a little bit. These are short clips. So from a unity standpoint, they automatically have a big focal point on the stage, that everything about that clock. So their whole show probably should acknowledge and be about the clock. This idea would be, have they planned and they look kind of like numbers in their small groupings. They have the clock wheel spinning. They have an emphasis that's really clear. And they have an interesting kind of machine-like body aspects and the different shapes that they're creating as they go through that moment. And so do you sense, anybody else see other things that they'd want to highlight? Does the body work really unify, and does it relate to each other? How they use texture when they come in here to the center with the separate dancers. Yeah, there's a layered comment. So what I want you to start seeing also is, from a basic standpoint, what is the, I want to put it back here at the beginning, the opening shape. So let's just think about this from a shape standpoint in the drill. So this could be any class, any level show. This happens to be a world-class show. But as you go through, and they've changed from circle to the small pods, and then they're texturing that with the group coming in more towards the center. You could see this in every single class, depending on the complexity of the show. And so layering, adding depth and detail, connecting the body parts together into the resolution with the pair in the center, that whole piece works towards that solo toss. But that's the area for judges. You want to design your show in that manner, from start with the frame and add in and build up. And that's what you should hear judges speaking to as you work through your show and as you get different aspects of commentary. This is one that I want to have you watch and consider. Does it stay unified given the challenge of the big clock face, and that you want to see variety of space usage? But it also creates opportunities for things that could be potentially better composed. So we'll watch that again. What I want you to do is look at it from the context of your comfort. The first obvious thing to me is to watch here. The balance is okay, and then they get a little caught in trying to get all the flags in, back right-hand side, trying to force the rifles over to get their connection back to the flags. Then it's okay here that they have a unified idea, and they've actually written the equipment work well together to come up with the flags. It leads into that toss. So you can see that from a structural standpoint, they had a good understanding. They wanted to show that variety, but then they had some issues that made it not quite work. I think now if you look at detailing of what do the parts in the equipment say to each other, and they've done a good job with dimension. I'm just not sure all the parts really work as well together as they could. And then can you see that solo saber through the silks? So that's a moment when there would just be some questions that I think judges could ask. Now, this was an 83 or 84 or something on the score sheet. So it's just saying that they have, how can you not be 100? Well, this is how. The other aspect that I want you to start thinking about, and we'll see it with some other videos later, is if you would potentially, you know, later I want you to kind of cover up and maybe not watch a certain part, but if you took any one of these sections away, would the whole moment work or not work? So I think it's a challenge that they've tried to show us variety and show us different impacts. Maybe it works okay. There are some challenges and some errors, but I think I'd want to hear more about quality of how they've designed the pieces and parts together. One thing you'll see and notice in this team also is there's a lot of individual risk and pair risk, but there's not a lot of interdependent risk. And so that's a way that you can start moving up in the score sheet as well. One last one on this team. So again, it's in the horizontal composing process for this team. They're doing a very good job of trying a lot of different ways to show us use of the floor, still grounded in the clock, and then how they use dimension to really relate to that. In this one too, I'm going to start that over. Watch the flag on the left-hand side and watch that flag take our eye through this entire event. So that's a way to have a soloist show us where you want us to look, and then how this whole process is evolving and working across time in terms of there's the start on the left, working through the rifle tosses that finish out in the saber tosses, and the flag comes back into the center on the stage. I think there are some challenges in looking at balance on the stage, and do all of the placements of the dancers here in the front work against the clock. It goes, these are minor, but they start to differentiate teams. That this group has a challenge of working the individuals. Does this dance part picks up different parts of the musical line? In the end, I think they've got a unified block. It's kind of a triangle shape here at the end. I think there's just potentially some opportunities for them to have used their space a little bit better. And one thing we talk a lot about is how many of these examples have I shown you in this group were ripples or sequentials versus unison statements, ensemble statements. This last dance moment was it built into a more unison statement. It starts with that rifle toss together. I think what we want to be able to see is variety of ways that you present your skills, variety of ways you create your moments and tell that story. And Ensemble Excellence is in design analysis, and that gives credit for training that's consistency across the team. We could see consistency if we looked at each individual person through that ripple, but I think if you watched each person through the ripple, you would start to notice that they're not all approaching it exactly the same way, because it's too risky. So that's something the judges need to be doing, is looking at the risk level, the consistency, the training that you're demonstrating. And so I think that's a place for you as designers to come to the table and say, show off your strengths, show off your talents in the right way. This is a smart way to do it if you don't have as consistent a group, and you choose your risk moments. And I think it's also a smart way to choose your composition, is choose when you want to show unison and when you want to show ripples. Let's see here. What does Sharon put in the chat? Yeah. That's very interesting. And it shows you can still be successful, but then you're within a neighborhood, and then we would compare teams to different teams. My advice for you all is really to emphasize your strengths and your key moments, and that's what you want to show to the judges and show variety. Wanted you to see a couple pictures that were similar to, that was a world team, this is a regional A team. And I don't have the videos for this one, but I wanted you to see that they've set this up as a starry night concept on the floor. And again, I would be telling people, you live or die by your prop choices, you live or die by your floor choices. So here's a way to say, look, use the floor, use line through the arms, use your emphasis with the soloist, and you can see how that relates to the floor. Their use of color pops, they're stars in the sky, and so the color comes, they use dimension again, they're using the floor. Whether or not you do the floor design first and then build the show, or build the show and then do the floor design, it could be up to you. I think when we talked a little bit earlier about motif and repetition, those could be areas that you add into the show and sprinkle through later. So you could plan it early, but then it could be something that you need to add at a later point in time. Here's an interesting example with this team that I wanted you to see, that they try to show variety and they spread people out. And this is a question in terms of, does it work? When am I supposed to ignore your floor? And when am I supposed to use your floor? And so I think that's just something you have to think about when you're designing, that are these groupings close enough together? Are they in the right location on the floor where I could feel balance? So you get points for variety, and then you might have some questions for staging and how you're connecting some of the ideas together. All right, that's the big unity review. Any specific questions or thoughts in that section? Otherwise, I'll jump into some detail elements in the compositional process. Looks like we're good to go. And then we can always come back and talk about any of those anytime. Hi, Richard.
Quick question.
Yeah.
On the black gold video, so the one that we looked at, numerous different clips, how would you comment around their choice of color and uniform against such a busy floor? Because at times I'm not sure how that was helping or not helping them.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I think it somewhat pops for them in terms of the color. I think they took a risk with it clashing sometimes. Like you're saying, like if we look at this picture right now, they match some of the shading on their curvy pieces, but they're not prime. One of the examples we're going to watch a little bit later is a Diamante from a few years ago, but they're just in black on black. And so it's very clear and clean, and they can show off their style. I think in design analysis, what I would do is what you mentioned, is call out that maybe they don't always pop off the floor enough, or do they blend into the floor too much, depending on what the answer is. And I think it exposes their body lines, and then you can see those discrepancies often. And then I think, unlike this team, it would probably come out as a one-time comment in design analysis that the color choice makes it easy to see them. but color should be acknowledged. To me, the flags make me think of stars and suns. The uniforms make me think of the sky. And so then I see that as a design intention. And in design, we talk about the choice and the design impact, but not whether it was effective or not. Other questions? And you can always type them in or save them and we'll get to them for sure. So moving into the score sheet itself and design analysis, these are the elements that are on the score sheet, and they are points of comparison that we should be considering. And as we talked about earlier, as you design and look at your show, how are you choosing to create each of these elements? And we talked a little bit in the Black Gold video about relationship of the pieces and parts and the body and equipment, how they use motion, and whether motion always worked for them. A storyboard across the show would be when, who, what, when, how, why things are happening. You need to have designed that out over time. And then we look for that plan. And then there is the reflection of the music, or if you choose to go opposing to the music, and then a lot of dynamic variations in terms of how you're achieving. We'll see some of those in the next set of videos. We want to look for imaginative and inventive use. So we'll talk the last third of today about you want to see logical evolution, and then imaginative choices, and then creative choices, and also how do I remember you as somebody unique in a class that might have many competitors who are similar. We talked about variety, the variety of ways that you show design elements together. Transitions, we want to see that you've actually planned for an equipment change or an evolution on and off the stage, rather than it's just forced or it's too obvious. And then what are the details? And as you build on the framework of the show, some of the Black Gold example earlier was really good, deep, basic design. And then we would be talking more about level and quality of characteristics details over time. Here are things we would love to hear judges talk about sometimes, in how you put design elements into the show and being able to acknowledge those and speak to those. And then on the score sheet, it's always related to, do the performers understand it? And which parts of it are they better at? And then becomes that qualitative look at what you've presented for us. This one speaks to your horizontal plan, your basic structure across the show. And then in each moment, we would be digging into the depth and details and creativity of that moment by itself. We spent a lot of time on Unity today, so and then now we'll watch a few more videos. So what I want you to think about, given what we've talked about so far, is look for the clear intention of this phrase, and then we'll talk some more about it. I'll let you watch it a couple times, and if you put in the chat elements that we've talked about from the design terms, and then from a Unity standpoint. And I'm intrigued by that, just seeing how and where they start from. You could argue those are potentially little trios, different spaces, different ways that they move across the stage. I mean, can you predict what's going to happen? Yeah, I think they surprise us by creating the intensity and the chaos in the music, and they show off individual strengths and skills. And then there's this use of line and dimension to create that emphasis to the skill that's the pair that has the big moment. And then you get the surprise. There's tension in the bodies, and then you get the surprise of the one person connecting that whole sequence together. Any other design elements people see, want to put in the chat about that? Interesting too here, if we just look at this last set, notice on the far right-hand side and that curve around the pair, that everything's radially emanating from that pair. I might have wanted to see this front right, lower right person more radially in there too. I want you to notice as well that this is, I think this is early in this show, and I can always play the whole show later depending on our time. But look around the stage at the set and around the floor chart. And they could have potentially folded the flags a little bit better. But really this show is about, they're in black, they spin flag, rifle, saber, and they're all on rifle later. But it's pretty simple, it's straightforward, it's very unified, it's very clean in that look in terms of simplicity. And they're just about showing off their skills and their strengths. And then as we watch a couple more of these videos, just look at the drill could be in any class, depending on how motion's used to put the moment together and the virtuosity of the performers that they show off. Yeah, Ivan put in that they avoid the primary focus on the catch until the best planned time moment. That's right. So this all is building up that big impact. So I think that they've done a really good job. Different shades of black work on the floor. Yep. All right, let's watch this next one. So we'll watch it again. I want you to, it's hard to not watch the equipment, but just look at the basic drill form and how they're evolving through time. So I want us to note that, you know, as you would teach the show, the first thing that probably would be taught is that drill. And so from where they're evolving here, which probably is like diagonals kind of grid, and then they get to this first stop, which is diamond shape in the center. So there's a pretty straightforward drill set, and they've immediately shown us texture with the flags and the rifles and the sabers, so they're in different places. But that's a pretty straightforward drill, just done exceptionally well. As they finish this, then they move, and it's a restage into the 3 lines. And they've done windows, so it's textured right away. But I just wanted to see that the basic design there of the staging, any group could do. And then you start to layer on top of it, and how they interpret the 3 pieces of equipment. It could just be all flag, and you could face different directions, and you could add that difference. Back here at the beginning, it's also important at the end of the first catch is to see their body contraction from a dynamic standpoint. So how much they're interpreting the music through body choices, equipment choices. And Richard put in the chat about, I think it's interesting to see it's unified, but it's different groups of all these different voices, and then they come together and you get relief. You know, there's been a lot of chaos, then you get relief that automatically would become an effect probably too. But from a design standpoint, it's looking at, it's so loud, yet the music is changing dynamics. How do I see that when it's going to keep going? And then the way they get immediately punchy in the rifles in this next section, and then the sabers are in the ground, I think, helps us do that. You actually go to the rifles to watch the rifle. And there's another unified moment again here. So the motif of, we're going to give you a contrasting moment come together. Is it the body undulation that makes that come back together? The opportunity to see layers and layers and layers that you could add over time. As you could see evolving that from a design standpoint as your performers became more comfortable. So we might see that over the course of the season. This drill wouldn't change, but then how they achieve the equipment, maybe they started just with a solid catch, and then you add in the contraction in that evolution. And I think as we've presented so far, very unified approach, very clean lines. They show off their strengths, which is they're willing to take the risk of showing you all of their body details, even if they won't be completely perfect. And it's a pretty simple, straightforward color palette. I think their costume actually was textured on this so that you'd have a little more interest, but black, white, and this burgundy color. Here's an evolution again, thinking about texture, but also I'll let you watch it once and then we'll watch it again for what's the drill evolution that they plan, and then we'll dig into a little bit of the equipment writing. Yeah, thanks for the comments in the chats about, I think the shadows are interesting because I would tell folks to plan your show for the venue you care the most about. So if you're planning for championship, you need to plan for that venue. This is an interesting video, and Sharon, this is a semifinals performance in the 1 year that the Worlds had to go, you know, I think it was in a different, this looks like Dayton to me though. So, but I think it's interesting whether the lights changed and helped create that effect. So it's really interesting to see that. Now, the video camera is at an angle that the judges are not. So we would not necessarily have seen it as much, but I think if you could know that and plan for it, I think it's a really great thought. The other comment in there, Ivan said, is their use of mass and their presence, their consistency helps give it unity as well. Yeah, and a lot of variety of dynamics in the
previous moment, William, the one we were just looking at previously. But
this one?
It was more for the one we looked at for a while. It was more related to that.
Oh, okay, this one. Yeah, because they're in that mass shape all the time. Thanks. So for folks looking at this sequence again, if you see the basic idea of and the one thing I like about them too is they use lines and lines like this to resolve ideas. When the music fades away, they go to a line. So Ivan's point about this one is the music's loud. They're loud looking, they're big, and they have 3 different people. And so seeing them then get softer shows the innuendo in the music, and the work in that part was softer as well. So they were really detailed in every way they wanted you to feel. This one, let's do that kind of comparison dynamics again. You know, do they reflect the music? Kind of meandering and growing. They do a really great job of masking that. They develop their transition set up for these pairs. And what's interesting to me is, you know, they have a strength and a motif, which is these acrobatic couples in their risk elements, which they set up in the center of that moment. The simple idea of there, they've gone from a line across the center of the stage to an X, and then the focal point becomes the X, but then they give you a surprise by having parts of the X be twos. So then the twos down the diagonal help us connect to the two in the center. That's the featured element of the pair. But then if you dig into the equipment, every section's textured and challenging throughout that whole piece. Yeah, I think they just do so well with how they come in and out of phrases and the body dynamics, and then they are all slumped over there towards the end to, again, unify it. A couple of comments in the chat there about, I agree, they have the tan floor. This is before WGI went with the total black. So there's more light in the stage and the area right now. So that's completely valid in terms of how it would affect us or let us know what to see. Barry asked about musicality. Musicality is significant in both design analysis and in general effect. I think they're both going to talk about how it reflects the music, how it's chosen to go with or against the music, or what I see here is their use of dynamics and the different planes really is how they've chosen to design with the music and bring it across. They're more about dynamic achievement, and it would generate an emotional connection. So I think both DA and GE would be talking about it, and GE more about, do they sustain the mood over time, and do they take you on a journey of the musical choices? Would talk about all the pieces they put together. I still think there would be that variety aspect that would come across. They've also achieved a real multiple events and now the setup for the pairs there was a grunt. They have the saber somewhat stabbing the rifles, and then they do that part together. So I think that's an interesting way that we would notice the body impact of those dynamics, and then GE might talk more about the whole stabbing and what's the communication of that from the artistic side. We would note in DA the artistic role and the consistency of role. Again, we wouldn't be getting into the emotional or the impact that it's having on us. All right, one more for them, I think. This is one that's later in the show, and what I wanted you to see is somewhat interesting here is how they've put together the rifles finished in this big block, and then the music dissipated, and they've dissipated to a line. And this was a way to show line, texture, emphasis, and the dynamics that they put together in the show so far. But also that you get the way the rifles are on the stage, the way they're pointed, you get a sense of motion already, and then how they've put that motion together. Yeah, I just want to, again, I picked the short one for emphasize that. Listen to the crescendo, diminuendo. Ivan commented the dynamic effort achievement elevates their design. I think that's completely correct. This group chooses to put themselves completely exposed. They show off their equipment skills, they show off their dynamics. Their dynamics are something unique to them. And that is what their show is actually about. One might say the staging is smart and has no flaws. What elevates it is the equipment writing and their dynamics that they put on top of their staging. They do have what I like to call in design a magical way of they get people on and off very seamlessly, even though I don't like the flags at the front left-hand side of this shot right now. In terms of as they put those away, they become a little bit of a distraction. That color is drawing your eye for the rest of their show. So it's details like that that we want to make sure everybody considers and thinks about. So it's interesting to me, we talk about precision, and you would not necessarily see precision, but I think they have a consistent achievement of dynamics and their presence in this phrase. So that may be the comment that I'd want judges to say, and that could be a question for designers and critique, is give me credit for approaching dynamics in such a consistent way. All right, any questions, other thoughts on that? I want to move on to a couple other things and then get through my last few slides, and then we can always go back and watch some other videos. Want to make sure that we talk a little bit about color, and it is a design element, and it should be discussed. It should be commented upon. It should be recognized as a part of the plan. If it's causing a question in design, or it seems to clash with what we're supposed to look at, or it makes it look dirty. Sometimes things look dirty based on the color choice, or as we talked about the black gold example of their colors on top of that floor, can you see it? That would be areas that we want to make sure and talk about. I know, I thought about that. Color. Should have done it for England, right? The emphasis, harmony, balance, interest, for sure. Color tells a story. And so I think we would talk in design about, does it reflect a musical change? Does it show a consistency and unity to the plan? When I put in, it helps with the mood. So GE would talk about the mood and the dynamics over the course of the show. Design would talk about that variety, and does it show changes to match the dynamics? And does it help us see unity and relationship between the elements? I just had a couple of pictures to call that out in terms of color as choice of simpler color on top of complicated floors, and also placement in terms of, are they stars in the night? You know, we've seen a couple of that starry night idea today. Oh, this one is a video. I think this example would be using the color on the floor as a spotlight. So often we'd want to hear design judges speak to spotlights, emphasis, stages, the use of line on the floor. In this example, even a comment related to the lines that are on the floor coming out in the silk, and that the color is a reflection of the sky. So again, comment on the design choices without getting into whether the color is an effective choice or not. And then we saw a lot in the Diamante show, the last one in the black on black, about texture and how they create interest given a simpler design choice. And I think it helps you know where to look, and it starts to tick boxes across the entire score sheet. So here's a couple of screenshots from that video, different parts of their show, of creating emphasis on the sabers here as a texture inside the dancers. There's also a use of dimension here at the same time. And then inside the bodies, there's different texture on the ground. They're not in stark line on the ground. They're creating interest in the body shapes. And this is a way for texture and their use of body line to create unity. So again, you see details every end of a phrase, all parts of the equipment, the sabers there with that left arm out in the curve, the use of line in the legs really unifies this moment. This is at the end of that feature where they've come through and locked in together. So that would become a motif we've seen a few times already, how they unify the ends of phrases and come back together. And then we saw this earlier in the video clip of how they set up that connection to flags, to the rifles, but then it's very unified based on the drill stage. And this was a freeze moment in that last clip that we saw. I want to go through a few more slides here on details that you might see in the show and how I want you to consider gaining quality in the design. You've seen a layered approach as we put it through the various video examples today, and really writing the parts to look like they went together so that it's not evident that different people wrote different parts. And we've seen a lot of examples there in the equipment and the body composition on those videos of how they could be smart and make it work together. We also talked about precision being different from achievement. And I think that's the key place for judges to move into, is speak more to actually the achievement of the strengths and the achievement of the choices that were designed. Precision is one way to get credit. And we want to see that dynamics are usually harder to teach and harder to achieve. So they should get potentially, in my mind, higher achievement if they're done together and understood the same way. The design analysis sheet, as we mentioned earlier, it's really the only sheet that gives ensemble training points. And that's why we want the unison moments. There needs to be an acknowledgement of when we see the training it required to achieve a moment or to achieve a unison toss, a unison dance move. We really want to make sure that that comes across in the design analysis commentary. And we've talked a lot about follow your rules and be smart. And we saw some examples there of, I think the drill design for the last show, Black on Black, wouldn't have any flaws. So what elevated the show? It starts to move up based on the intention of how it's interpreting the music and its dynamics and the understanding of those performers. This is somewhat for judges to think about, but designers to make sure you plan. And again, this is where I think you can go back and sprinkle things through. but I also feel that you can filter your choices over time with principles that you've put in place at the beginning. You know, what are the rules of your universe, and what are you going to do to not go against those rules? Oh, we have to have the all flag moment. Why? You need to be able to answer it. And it's okay if you say it's because that's what we see in this class and you want to do it. That's okay. I think you just have to be able to justify it and see how it fits into the whole of your show. This is what I would want judges to be able to speak to as they watch and interact with you during the season, that you've got a clear intention, that your intention is commented upon, even if they get it wrong, so that then you can have a good conversation with them, and that you go back through and make sure that your show is achieving that intention all the time, and then use the feedback you receive to filter choices you might make again in your show as you work. Here's an example I want to have everybody think about, and it helps to me to see how you build and grow a show in terms of your plan and the design quality, especially from a staging standpoint of when and how you choose to do equipment moments that we've talked a lot about. Eliminating errors, making it logical, that should be an element that we hear from judges and that we see in your show. Then your universe and how you've put the show together would really be clear. And so we wouldn't say that you stood in the river or you're about music, interpretation, and dynamics, and then there's a section that doesn't quite follow the same pattern. Then I'd want judges to talk about that. The examples we showed, especially the black on black ones, really were emphasizing how you can layer and add range and depth, nuance, and details to the design that you've put in place over time. Then as you move up in any class, we don't necessarily want it to be complex, but there would be additional complexity, additional thinking, additional creativity that we would start to see in a class. So how do you move from an 80 to a 90? Is you might consider some of these elements that would start adding value. There's this element of, can you do more? But I think it's, can you do more of what you've already set out to do? Can you explore dynamics? Can you do something in a slightly different way that would start adding value to your show? And this model I like for judges to think about when they're applying composition and talking about your design choices. And then I want you to think about it as well as you put your show together. And then we spent a lot of time at the beginning on the whole unity question. And to me, that's key, that adds to, you should start to hear that more on your files, and we can see that clear intention across the entirety of the show. As Ivan had mentioned on the Black on Black show, Diamante, is I would want judges to try to get to speaking to you about what they see as your unique strength, what you tried to do, and then how well you did it. And so this really starts to go into this. They were choosing to have a clear floor, no props, nothing else getting in the way of us seeing them be great at their skills. So what training and skills did it take for them to be so exposed? How could they make every transition seamless and perfect? And then you start to compare them and their choice against themselves to another team and their choice against them. And then you compare the two and say, who was better at what they set out to be? So there could be a group that's better individually, but may not have the whole show put together. And then that's when we should start to see differences in movement, equipment, design, GE. As you work through the season, you want to get your strengths and your credit for where you are in your area. And if you spent time on design analysis, it should be obvious and should come across. Here's some items just to remind you, a lot of things we've talked about today in terms of how you can approach putting your show together, maybe think about it differently, how I want design judges to think about it, and how your conversation could be different now as you work through teaching and then you work in critique of what is it you're trying to do, and can I get judged and rewarded on that? And I think it could be an interesting way to work through a season. Here's some takeaways for you if you haven't picked up on the themes that I've been hopefully hammering at you. I do think it's important for you to acknowledge your own unique skills and strengths, and then also your performers' uniques and strengths, and then what it is your goal. I always start a critique with, what is your goal? If your goal was to win today, then we'll have a different conversation. If your goal is to get kids to come back next year, we'll have a different conversation. If your goal is to train and build out of a saber line, then we'll have a different conversation. But I think if you're more clear on what your goals are, then we can have that conversation. I do like to say that there is a formula. To me, the formula is on this page in terms of achieve well, be memorable, and have a uniqueness to you. And I think that applies in every class. And if we can have that conversation, I think from a judging standpoint, I think that's more significant in getting you and the judges to a place that you want to be. This is just a reminder of the pyramid, as I like to call it. And then now we can open it up for conversation. I can we can watch that whole video. Lots of possibilities. Dig into anything. I can go change my slide on color.
William, can I ask a couple of questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've judged many cards over years, and the problem I see a lot of guards have is they can have someone who can teach a rifle to spin, someone who knows how to teach the dance, and they struggle to put the whole thing together in terms of what we'd consider as a design analysis part, which is what you just typically, really clarified with the concept of unity, clear intention. What can you recommend to these sort of guys to try and get that concept put together? Because they seem to say, well, we haven't got a designer in our unit, so we don't think we're going to be able to do design analysis, but which isn't the case. But it's how they can be sort of encouraged to try and put the show together with their own individual skills, but understand what they're trying to sort of ultimately aim for. And I think that's the issue. The better guards over the last few years definitely are because they've got someone who happens to be into designing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, not all the guards have got that, and quite a lot of the new guards don't have that magic person picked out.
Yeah, and it'd be good to hear from anyone with ideas on that. My first thought would be is to have those, whomever is on the staff, meet together to decide and understand at least what is this moment about, who's the feature, who has priority, and maybe there's a way to show that more cohesively, or watch each other's section with a different intention of what we're trying to show that might help get that cohesion. I think each group probably needs to come back and say, how are we going to achieve this unity? Or, we put it in earlier as get grandma to come and I always like to think of getting somebody else to come and look and then just say, does this make sense to you? Do you see some oddity? Do you see something weird? I think the community could help each other a bit more as well, in terms of if you see someone has that eye, if you can't find and pick a person who's going to be that filter on staff, then maybe there's a way to help each other try to achieve that. To me, having sat down and really come through with clear intention for each group, we see it in the summer a lot, where there's 9 captions and every group can win a different caption, but doesn't mean you're going to win the show. So is there somebody trying to make it coordinated? I don't know if that gets there.
Yeah, no, I think that's the whole point. I think it's trying to get that understanding. They've got to have that overall sort of, either they do it as a team or they have that overall person, because there are even some guards who are very good in, as you're saying, each individual caption, but they just don't have that way of gelling it together, because they don't almost seem to understand what the plan is or what it's all about in terms of the overall design. And they struggle sometimes when they come into critique and you try and explain it's just not connecting, and it's just not got a sense of unity. And they look at you and say, well, our rifles are really good and we really dance well and we've got lovely costumes, but they miss the point. And you almost feel like saying, well,
Yeah.
Michael Gaines next year, obviously, which they can't do. So
Right.
what can they do instead? And that's what they've almost got to try.
They can watch this video, Ivan, now.
Yeah, I mean, it's out.
Well, and I do think Ivan, to that point, maybe in those critiques would be even at that moment to say, decide amongst you, or who's going to be that person, because there needs to be a clear eye and a consistent decider that gets the egos or the strengths out of the room sometimes. So depends on their goals though, right? You have to say that I'm guessing they're coming and going, why aren't we winning? And then if you want to win, then you have to do some different things when we start to look across the class, right?
Yeah.
Did you have another question, Ivan, or should we?
I did have one on just basically the concept of triad. Again, that's very much something we get addressed, like we are using all three pieces, or is it okay for us to spend a minute doing some dance and then pick up equipment and do a minute of equipment? How much are we sort of as judges almost, I guess, trying to balance and say, well, great, this is really working well, but you haven't picked up equipment for the last 2 minutes. So there's got to be a certain limitation to how much credit we can give. But there's no set rules as such to say you have to have the triad constantly on display. How do you sort of judge that sort of?
I think the key, to me, I might print out the pyramid and have it with you and be able to go. I was thinking back to a lot of teams. Whenever I was teaching, we always went the first 2 or 3 minutes without touching a piece of equipment. And so it made us stand out and be different. And so I think the key would be is judge a team against their own choices. And so you just say, was it deep enough, detailed enough, interesting enough, had a lot of variety for the time they didn't do something, because we're not going to ask them to do something. And triad is an option, but it's not an expectation. I was looking back through old videos from the 80s and 90s, and those teams back then were triad all the time.
Yeah.
Period. And I was intrigued to look at them and go, they would take out a bunch of teams nowadays because we've moved beyond the triad. And so I think we're further in the space of, do you stand out for your uniqueness? Have you followed, that's why I want to emphasize this, have you followed your choice more? And then you say, okay, you 3 teams have all the same level of unity and consistency in a plan, and now this one does this better, this one does more, this one shows me more range. Then we start to have a different conversation. And I think what I would do is push a team to say, within your choices, can you show me more within a range that's this big? Because somebody's going to show you a whole journey and a lot of different variety. And you can't, more is more, but is more better. And I think you have to make a qualitative decision at some point. There's not a checklist, and there's not an element of they did more. Especially in design, we have to be able to say, yes, you did more, but I don't see how it added value. And then you have to have a really hard conversation, even with yourself. Why not? What makes you say that? When too much is too much and simplicity or less is better. So we're wanting people to get to that qualitative state, that more in the context of your choices is more. More for more is not more.
Not less is more. Harry, you had a question after that. Thank you.
I did. Yeah. It's a bit of a broad question, William. I'll throw it at you. What areas of design analysis would you say that groups tend to be typically vulnerable in? And then secondly, do you find that differs from class to class?
I think broad generalities would be dynamics are hard. And if you can show dynamic consistency, you will move way higher in any class. I think there's also an element, especially in open, where you have to have a unique idea, because they're struggling with being in the middle and learning a lot of things and adding more complexity. I think I don't see the opens find their way as much in a unique, unified approach. The A class to me needs to really emphasize achievement and then look at different ways to show off that achievement level, which could be dynamics, but the dynamics in A can be simply texture and variety and less about, they should be able to show time and probably space a little bit, but weight and flow are hard for the younger kids. And then world teams, the real issue in world class to me is there's a consistent level of achievement as individuals, and the vulnerability or the way you get really higher is to start creating more dependencies on each other, would be my view. So, but I think that's a way for us to have that conversation with teams and to say, you have solid training, you're showing me everything I expect for a class, and now what? You know, which kind of goes to Ivan's question too of, so apply this training and show me it in these other ways, or explore your creativity a little bit more. So I don't know, does that help, Barry?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just it's something.
And then I would want judges, and this would go somewhat to Ivan's question, because I get it a lot in critiques with WGI is, how do we, and it happens in CGN a lot, is just because they don't have rehearsal time, is how do we show more? And what I will tell them is, don't change what you're doing, change how you're doing. So then I see more range in your dynamic understanding. You don't have to change what you wrote.
Yeah.
And the more you build that, that shows a different full body understanding that we could see in all the classes. And I think that's a safer place for judges, you know, rather than saying, show me triad, because then I do get triad if I see dynamics different, you know, for the same part. So, yeah.
That's great. No, that we have, so obviously CGN that you see that as well. So rehearsal times from show to show, sometimes we don't see that level of progression so quickly. It takes time.
Yeah, and I think that's a key, and I probably would say that's a tough one for judges, and the maturity for judges needs to be react and respond to the show you see that day, and everyone is on a different path.
Yeah.
And if someone comes out and they show you they're just precise and stunning day one, they probably get some points. Then the question is, where do they go? And then as you see the team that's putting it all together over the course of the 3 months, when they get it, they probably beat everybody, you know, because they're in it. But if they don't get it, that's different. But I think that's a valid point of, and understanding too of, again, people's goals, because people's goals could be, we want to write a lot of stuff and have people have fun, and we won't ever be clean. Okay. That might go against winning. You just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think having that honest conversation about what is the team about, whereas a team that's all about training and there may be limited in dynamics, they need to hear that from people, and you need to profile that on your scores.
That's great. Thank you, William. Is there any more questions, Sharon?
There's nothing in the chat box. Anyone out there got anything they'd like to ask?
I can have another one if you got. I don't want to hog all the questions.
No, go on, go for it. Anyone else? Give us a shout if you do. If not, Ivan, go for it.
William, the concept of sort of relationship to music. At what point, from analysis, do you actually sort of let it be a little bit sort of abstract and innovative, to the point where you suddenly think, well, hang on, this is an emperor closes situation where they're doing something that is so different. This just isn't working, full stop. Or do you just steer away from that and let it still try and sort of develop and come back later?
I take a pretty pure view on musical choices, especially like A guards. I need to be able to count it. If I can't count it, then I'm going to destroy you. So you know, and if I can't count it, they can't count it. And what I'll usually say is, because it happened after Onyx won that one year, everybody the next year came out with the nebulous no count music. And the way I put it in design is I'd say, okay, your choice. I think it's luck if your team gets together and not design in A class. Because I've seen it where sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not because they can't count it. In open, it gets a little more free. I think you could still have what you said, Ivan, of do they have the training and the planning to meet the choice they set? And then in world, they're allowed to do whatever they want. But you can still challenge them on, does it really add value? Or like you said, Emperor has no clothes. Like, I don't get it, or I don't see your intention. You're just doing stuff for stuff's sake. And I think that's the conversation we need to be willing to have. But in A class and regional A, I'm pretty harsh on them. And I think people need, because achievement's what matters. And I think you just have to, I always put it in a choice category. Okay, you've chosen music, you can't count. I don't understand it. I'm not sure your kids understand it. So how do I give it points?
Does that switch around then at the world level, that actually it's considered a risk and you therefore reward that risk if it's something that they can't count?
Yes.
And if they're showing a high level of achievement, it's actually a plus point rather than a detractor.
Yes. And I think we want, so then the consideration, and I think it happens in design as well, is what is the skill and training required for the team to achieve what you're seeing? And if there is no meter, then how are they staying together? And what training did that take? I think also we've emphasized the last few years, it's not really I think it is somewhat a change in philosophy around music. Literal reflection of the music is only one way that a team could use music. Now, again, open and worlds, and mostly worlds, could say the music is just mood. It has no meter. We're not literally ever going to reflect it. Okay, needs to be clear, right? Or with the in addition of people singing or performing on the stage, what does that do? We don't judge the music, but it means it's a different risk environment. It creates a different impact in GE more than design, depending on what those people do. But I think if you look at what did it really take to do it, because we learned a couple years ago, it was the Blue Coats, that they actually had a music track going under a tape playing underneath, so the live stuff didn't work in finals. And so it was an interesting element of they were just smoke and mirrors. But how much credit were they getting? They were getting more in GE for a while. But I like to look at it as what skills does it take, what risk elements, and risk is a part of the world sheet and no other sheet. So, and that's what I usually would say to an A guard too. It's risk is not on your score sheet.
Sometimes picking up equipment's a risk.
That's right. Put it back down. Yeah.
I've seen enough. What?
Yeah.
Have we got anything more out there, peeps? I'm fascinated. I know you're all laughing at me.
I've got just a general question, really.
Yeah, go for it.
A lot of our units are obviously the lower end. So we've only got obviously one world unit, 2 or 3 open. So what, in terms of DA, are we talking really for kind of cadets and junior level? What would you be expecting to see at that level? Because I think that's much more where our organizations sit.
Yeah. I usually put, I apply really, it's the smart choices, and are they doing what they need? I think some of the things we've talked about today still apply on a level that is, do you make your kids look good? And for cadets and juniors, I'm okay if you stand still and you just made good choices. And then, you know, that's when you start to maybe challenge them a little bit. They're trying too much. They're moving too much. They're not letting us see just what we expect to see, which is training in those classes. And then if a team somehow puts more of that together and shows you more range, then they're probably going to get a higher score in the caption, as long as they're doing the achievement aspects. But I think come back to what's expected in those classes and how would they get points. We don't expect them to be super design and composition people, but we don't want them to be having their kids look good. I just fall back on the simple, do your kids look good? Were you smart? And then are you musical? And then if you're creative, all of a sudden you get more points.
And does grandmother get it?
And does grandmother get it? Really simple. Yeah, it's really simple. Yeah. But I think that's where I would say that's where the design people need to say, it's great you're standing in the block. And whenever they get it, you could say, hey, maybe they could window or just face opposite directions and you get texture points, so it's things like that. But it's really about achievement and keeping it at the basic level. We're not going to see, I think a design is, you could just take a simple view as everything that you see has been designed and chosen. So judge that in the criteria of the class.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, leading on from that, Sharon, I think that's the problem we have over here. We've got a lot of units who design shows not understanding what they actually got in terms of the skill and the ability of their performers. And then we, the judges get the kicking because halfway through the season we say, look, this isn't working.
Yeah.
And we can.
Well, and I like to think, that's where I feel the judges could really have more impact. I think it's true now, listening to this, it's true in every class and every situation. The judges will get more of what they reward. And so I think if this group could agree on what they want the judges to reward in those different classes, then we will start to see that change. Because to me, and I think that's where I want judges to stand up and say, achievements on every score sheet, smart choices is on every score sheet. Musicality is there too, but if they're little butterflies and they never really spin and it's a swing flag, that's okay. That's good for cadets, right? So I think we have to speak the same language and be careful of what we give credit to.
Yeah, because that critiques, we get composition discussed at critique probably 90% of the time. And they don't even talk about the excellence until you actually sort of bring it in and say, well, by the way, what you just described, we're not seeing that.
That's right. And that's where I'd want to see people, and I think we're making good progress, is really profile the scores, sub-captions that way. Yeah. But that's when, for me, I get way more pure in composition that if you make bad choices, you don't get composition points either. That if you're choosing a lot of stuff and they don't have the training or it doesn't work together, I'm not going to give you a high comp score and a low excellence unless I can really tell. But maybe they could get it someday. Mm-hmm. But also give those teams that come out and have been really smart and achieve well, let them win excellence every time. And somebody will start noticing.
Mm-hmm. I think that's excellent advice. Any more? Last question time. No? Well, it's been absolutely fascinating. I don't know about anyone else, but it's been so lovely to listen to your commentary and to see sort of live examples. And I know this is going to be a benefit to not just the people here tonight, but more broadly across the membership as a whole, William. So thank you ever so much. Does anyone want to chip in at all? Or
no, I'll just say, obviously,
oh.
I know, sorry.
Oh, it's you.
No, I'll just reiterate what Pete said. Obviously, it's quite difficult. Obviously, my primary is junior class, so it's trying to get that balance of sort of having that strive to look at what the videos we've just looked at, i.e. world class, and try and simplify that.
Yeah.
Have that as a goal. Hopefully, most people's goals is to try and get their kids to be their best they can be, but actually, your goal would always try to strive to be up there, wouldn't it? So it's getting that fine balance of striving yet being realistic, but simplifying the world-class strategy, really, isn't it? So I think
we could do Barry, I know we talked about doing a judge one of these that, you know, I could do just regional A and A class or cadet videos in that one, and then people could have that as access to it too.
I think that would help. I think that
Yeah.
would really help.
We could definitely look at that to do more class specific and class expectations, like a cadet and a junior one, and maybe an A and open one as well. So I think that'd be really helpful. What's great about these sessions is it's very thought provoking. And this is the foundation. It's great that this is the first one, and the information you've already provided, William, it's so thought-provoking. And Chris and I have been chatting like throughout. Actually, we've never really considered that. Because when you're teaching and designing, you're not necessarily thinking about all those components and applying it to the caption. You're just in one zone. But it's not until you step back into a session like this, you give it more consideration, and light bulbs are going off all over the place. So I think it's a really good point that maybe Sharon and I and Mark and Alan can sort of like look at it in the new year of like cast specific sessions with William talking about design and those elements. And it's great to see the judges on here as well and inputting as well. So I think
that's one of the things I was saying earlier in the chat, was it's about the common language, isn't it? And making sure that we all understand what each mean. You know, you say one thing and you think that's what you're expressing, but somebody else is receiving it in a different way. So by all being in these sessions, hopefully, if nothing else, we can start to speak in a similar term and understand each other a little better.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Quickly ask William, is there any intention to try and reduce the points of comparison on the composition caption? Because when you look at it, I think that scares people anyway, and they see a sort of massive points of comparison to the other captions.
Yeah, there is, I think from WGI, there hasn't been even without a philosophical change, which is good, that there has been a discussion about that. It's just not had a prime focus of late. Yeah,
it almost implies, because there's so many, it's almost it's such a busy caption, and it gives people almost like a complexity feeling straight away before they even start looking at it.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to look at is the A class sheet, or is it a little bit simpler? I think it is, but not much, right?
Not a great deal, I think.
So I think that would be really helpful. I think that's why if we could see, and even that's the challenge, is what we talked about just a few minutes ago, is cadets, juniors is not the A class, or is not the regional A sheet even. I mean, really, it's like the WGI system came from the world sheets, and so then it's not been as clearly shifted. And I think that could really help us to get it down to a place that's more straightforward.
Okay. I'm going to call it time there, Ivan. Sorry to...
I'm good. Yep.
I know you guys could chat all night, and that's lovely. So, yeah,
it is the important caption, isn't it? It is the main caption.
Excellent. But no, thank you for taking such an interest, and that goes, for all you judges that are with us tonight as well. And you've asked some really great questions, thought-provoking questions for everybody involved. So really appreciate that. Excellent. I'm just going to pass over to Mark then to wrap us up, and thank you all for coming.
Just to say a huge thank you, William. We really enjoyed tonight. It's been really informative, and thank you to everybody for attending. We've a couple more sessions planned before Christmas. Please make sure you get people to view this session tonight. It's absolutely awesome. I think the offer of support that we've got from William moving forward will be totally beneficial for our community moving forward. So thank you. So major thanks, everybody. Back to you, Sharon.
Thanks, William. But thank you so much. Spread the word, and we'll see you next time.
A reminder once again, education at wguk.org.uk.
This presentation is part of the WGUK Virtual Education Programme and has been brought to you in association with Guard Gear UK, the only official European distributor of Design by King products.